This is the Crownsville Hospital in Maryland. History like this should not be forgotten. This hospital opened under the name Hospital for the Negro Insane. It opened its doors in 1911. Construction started March 13th, and the patients moved in July. I spoke with a local, and he told me that in the 1980s, he used to deliver Coca-Cola to this facility that you're looking at right now. This building was for the non-criminally insane. He said the building didn't have air conditioning at that time. He said when he used to make his route, he used to walk in and they would all be sitting around naked, and the nurses would come in and spray them with water to keep them cool. This was one of the many inhumane things that happened. In the beginning, therapies included hydrotherapy and sedatives. In the 30s, insulin shock was introduced. In 1942, patients were intentionally injected with malaria. In 1948, the annual report came out. It said Crownsville had about 1,800 patients. 103 patients received shock treatments, 56 patients received malaria and penicillin treatments, and 33 received lobotomies. In 1955, there were 2,719 patients in a facility that was only designed to house 1,100. In 1962, the population was integrated. Parents that were unable to cope with restless offspring with epilepsy or syphilis dropped off their children there, particularly during the Great Depression, when parents couldn't afford care for kids with special needs. Some parents came to visit their children, but it was not uncommon for a family to never see a child again once he or she had been sent to the hospital. One common procedure that was performed was pneumoencephalography, drilling a hole in the skull and draining the fluid from around the brain. The fluid was replaced with oxygen or helium so that the doctors could better see the brain in x-rays. Patients suffered from headaches and vomiting until the brain naturally restored the fluid. George Phelps, who was the county's first black deputy sheriff, escorted countless African Americans from the courthouse where they had been convicted of serious crimes to the hospital's C building for the criminally insane. Several tried to escape. Phelps, who is now 86, says the African American community knew of the experimental therapy on patients suffering from syphilis and other diseases, but they couldn't do anything about it. Parents would jokingly threaten to take their kids to the hospital if they didn't behave. Driven by curiosity, Phelps broke a lock on a building in the 1950s and entered a basement laboratory where he found jars of skulls and parts of women's bodies. He said, and I quote, "I saw them with my own eyes. You understand? I was fascinated but disgusted." Although many patients were over 65, a 1955 report by the Department of Mental Hygiene reported 35 patients in the nursery and 169 under 16. Even as late as 1963, children were being injected with hepatitis. After making coffins for the dead, patients carted them to the nearby cemetery. Most of the gravestones are marked only with numbers, and the ledger that would have linked those numbers to names have been destroyed. The hospital shut down in 2004 due to lack of funding and lack of patients. There are many more accounts on this hospital that I haven't even explained yet. There's also a documentary on the Roku channel called Crownsville Hospital, Lunacy to Legacy. I highly recommend you give it a read. These things should not be forgotten.